Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dale Ann, and I'm really glad that you're here. Homeschool Minnesota is an outreach of Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators. So, raising kids, we talk a lot about child raising, homeschooling, all the things that have to do with parenting. And one of the things we talk a lot about is discipleship.
Mm.
And we all agree that discipling our children is like a real thing that we do. That's why God gives them to us. So, raising kids and having a family in today's culture can be a really big challenge. There are so many things that pull at us, and sometimes you wonder, do I engage or do I just keep the peace? How do we know when to stand up and when not to? What are we discipling our family to do in the face of culture clash? Today's guest, Mike Tatlock, is here to discuss these questions and to talk about his book, A Compelling Faith in a Compromising Culture. Welcome, Mike. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Dale. It's an honor to be on here with you.
I'm so glad that you're here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so one of the things that's great is I love the homeschool world, and I came from that. I spent a couple of years growing up with a homeschool. Each of our kids spent at least 1 to 2 years doing homeschool, so we really believe in that. And the reason why we did it was because we really believe the primary place for discipleship is the home. That is what we believe. We believe it's every parent's responsibility to be the primary disciple maker, of course, with support roles from churches and coaches and teachers and everything else. But the home is where we get to set that barometer. So I grew up with that value, and then I'm a pastor right now. Been a pastor for 30 years. We have a church south of Portland, and then I'm also the chaplain for the Portland Trailblazers and the Portland Fire, the men's and women's NBA teams.
That's really cool. We were talking a little bit earlier about how it's kind of fun because we have like the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx and how we've had really good years the last
Yeah.
couple of years. I mean, it's been really fun around here with that. And then our hockey team was doing really well at the same time. There were
Hmm.
playoffs teams. Our hockey team plays in St. Paul
Yep.
and the Minnesota Timberwolves play in Minneapolis. And there were many nights when the playoff games were happening at the same time and and it was just so much fun down here. But
Yeah. Good
anyways,
people there. That's for sure.
yeah, they're really great. I don't know. Anyway, we're not here to talk about basketball, even though we all love that kind of thing. That's not what we're here to talk about. I actually prefer football, but I like
Oh,
basketball too.
come on, let's
So,
go. You big old Vikings
um,
fan, aren't you?
I am. I've been a Vikings fan since I was little, and every year they break my heart, and every year I keep coming back for more. I don't know why.
You're a
It's
good
something
fan.
I need
You're a good
deliverance
loyal
from or
fan.
something. It's all right. Gives me something to do in the fall.
That's right.
Anyway, I'm really excited to talk about your book. You talk about culture a
Mm,
lot and the culture climate of where we are in the world. I think
mhm,
about when I raised my kids and
mm,
how at the time I thought, man, there's so much to there's just it's so difficult and there's so many
mm,
things that we're dealing with. But now I look at how my kids are needing to raise their kids and I'm thinking, oh
yeah.
my goodness, it's not even the same. I mean, it's unbelievable what they're dealing with now. And in your book, you talk about today's culture is like a storm. Can you
Yeah.
talk about why you said that and what that means?
Well, I think it's a storm in many ways. It's a storm of values, and we
Mhm.
see the values that we believe in, what we would say is a biblical worldview. And then we're living in a world that is progressive, it's secular, and does not have a biblical worldview. And,
Right.
and that causes a lot of tension. And, you can see that in the news. We both come from cities that have seen its share of headlines
Yeah.
from our states in
Yeah.
terms of just like issues and topics of culture and society, and then what happens is it leaves a lot of families fractured. It leaves a lot of churches fractured and divided, and people are either I don't want to say anything because if I say something today it's going to cause issues, so I'm going to be silent, which we don't want that.
Right.
If I do speak up, what does that look like? And so it's all over the place. But one of the main reasons that I call it a storm is the Bible says this, that there are those who will shipwreck their faith.
Mhm.
They've drifted. And right now we're seeing definitely those. That's why I use the word compromise in the title of the book.
Yeah.
And that word interesting, compromise, it's funny because I always use the word compromise as like a tool to use when you're doing helping a couple individuals working through disagreements. Let's compromise, find some middle ground. That's actually not what the word really means. The root word for compromise, because if you think about it, The word compromise has the word promise in it.
Yes.
And so when you look at the root word, it means to make an agreement with the wrong promises.
Mm.
So when we make agreements with the wrong promises, there's always a compromise. And in our cultural storm right now, there's a lot of labels, there's a lot of definitions out there that are using Bible words, but not Bible definitions. And because of that, I'm seeing a number of believers at young, middle age, older that are making agreements with what they think is a Bible word, but it's the world or it's the enemy's definition of that. And so they make agreements with those things and they compromise
Mhm.
their faith and they become shipwrecked. And
Uh-huh.
you find them falling away from their faith. They're not following Christ, or they've adopted some what I would call a perverted view of Christianity. It's just the world wrapped with Jesus words, but it's
Yeah.
not a true thing. So that's kind of some what I'm seeing in our world right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about compromise and you also discuss in your book counterfeit. And one
Yes.
of the things that I always think of, because it's easy for me to think of it, I think because of where I live, it's kind of
Yes.
a big deal right now,
Yeah.
is like justice, like social
Correct.
justice and
Yes.
justice. And how sometimes as Christians, because we're compassionate and we're meant to be compassionate. It's not
Yep.
like we leave compassion at the door. We don't. I mean, Christ was compassionate,
Mhm.
but we take the word justice and it's like you said, we're making agreements with the wrong promise.
Mhm.
So, what do you talk about when you talk about counterfeit?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about like that with things like justice, social justice versus God's justice.
I love that one. I had a whole section. I actually had a whole other chapter I was going to do that we had to cut it out just with space. But I do a lot of equipping sessions on what is biblical justice versus what
Mhm.
is, cultural, social justice that's there. And let me frame it this way. So we use the Bible.
Yeah.
Paul says that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. And so he, because no one's just going to wake up one day and go, I think I'm going to follow Satan. I mean, that's very few people do.
No.
He knows and
Yeah.
he's too subtle and he's too deceptive, so he has to look like light. And
Mhm.
so when Paul says that Satan masquerades as light, most people forget the next verse. The next verse says, "And his workers do acts of righteousness." The Greek word for righteousness is
Oh.
the kanesune, it's the word justice. So that
Mhm.
verse can be translated, Satan masquerades as light and his workers do acts of justice. And there's definitely a biblical justice, 100% we are called to a justice, but the biblical definition of justice centers around the righteousness and the holiness of God. He's the
Mhm.
standard of what's right or wrong. When you move the center and you redefine right or wrong, and then you create a justice around that, it becomes a false justice. And it looks like it. They use the Bible words all the time. But again, that's why I tell people there's things and movements right now where on the front of it, it looks good and Christians are joining it, saying we should be loving, we should step into that. They're
Right.
not discerning to note that it's actually a wrong spirit behind that, and it's just a subtle, seductive way to pull them away from their faith, and I've seen many people actually abandon their faith, and it started with a social justice movement, um,
Right.
and so I think for me as a pastor, here's what I would say too. Pastors and parents have the same job. Number 1, we're about discipling, but we are there to protect from evil, so we have to protect our flock, we have to protect our children. There's a level of, some would call it sheltering. I don't like that word.
Mhm.
There's a level of protecting them, but then also equally as important is preparing them for the world. So
Right.
we are called to help them discern what is good biblical justice and discern what is not. So when they go into the world, they can recognize that and go, "Hey, that's a counterfeit."
Mhm. I think we gotta remind ourselves that justice doesn't come without righteousness,
That's right.
holiness, repentance. These are the things that we need in order for true freedom,
Yeah.
true liberty, and
Yeah.
true justice to be, there. We have to have those things.
Wow.
You start out the 2nd chapter I like your 2nd chapter a lot. You start out talking about young Christians, who are on the outside appearing like they're doing really well, but inside they're struggling, and during that chapter, you talk about something called contending
Yeah.
and how is the opposite of compromise. Can
Mm.
you explain that a bit? And then how do we as parents
Mm.
contend for our families and our children, as
Mm.
well as teach them to stand up for what's real?
I love that. I think that's a great question. In the book of Jude talks about contending for the faith.
Mm,
And what I really appreciate about that idea of contending, because Jude also goes into explain that our job is to rescue those who drifted.
yeah.
And so we need to have a heart of compassion to gently bring those back that have lost their way. And so I think that's a way of contending is understanding that you can't contend for what you can't have a conviction around. So if you don't
Mm.
have everybody's got convictions, by the way,
Yeah.
whether they say it or not. Do you have the right convictions? Do you have the biblical convictions? But I think it starts by helping young students understand like what are convictions, where do they come from, and helping them be rooted in those convictions. And those convictions, by the way, when it comes to parenting, has to go beyond the conversations. I think parents, we should. I have a 27-year-old and a 23-year-old. I love both our kids. I'm so grateful, so honored and humbled that they're following Jesus deeply and love to go out on mission trips and serving. But one of the things our kids as young adults have told us that I'm learning even now is they said we did more than talk about it. They said they saw it modeled.
Yes.
And so when our kids were young, we were doing outreach in the communities. We were doing, short little mission trips here and there. We've done some overseas, but we raised our kids to be able to say, "Hey, we have a conviction that we have to live and protect and honor, but we have to go more than just conviction are not just something you say. If you truly believe in the conviction, it will show up in how you live." And I'm
Mm.
noticing that young people, when they are taught to live their faith, it tends to stick
Yes.
and to stay. So you have to have conversations, but it has to be lived out. So it becomes a value of the home, becomes memories, becomes special occasions. They'll
Yeah.
look back and go, I remember we did those things that were connected to our values and convictions. So I think contending, you have to fight for something, but if you can't define what you're fighting for, then it's hard to fight for. It's hard to contend for it.
Right. There are times when you're parenting when your kids are always watching you. It's
Every time.
terrifying. It's just terrifying, but
Yep.
they are, and I think about times when there's a battle going on,
Mm,
and to the world as Christians, oftentimes, people are like, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay."
mm,
But inside, you're not. The people that you can't hide that from is your family in your home.
yeah.
And so for them to be able to see as believers, their parents coming under some kind of a battle of some
Okay.
sort.
Yes.
Some sort of a coming at them. Maybe it's they've had a disagreement with somebody about some cultural thing, or I don't
Mhm.
know, just some different thing. But then to watch their parents walk that out, I think oftentimes as parents our go-to is to kinda just keep the peace at home so our kids don't get stressed out and they don't feel like, we don't want them to have, like, bad memories, and we don't want them to walking out a Christian faith can be difficult, and we don't want them to think that, and
Mm.
can you talk a little bit about, like, how that culture war of what we're dealing with? Because now we've got where if you disagree with somebody, that's considered violence. Just your
Oh, it's
speech,
ridiculous.
can be considered violent, and then we see how the reaction to that can be in our world today, which is so wrong, and when you're a child and you're watching your parents walk through something difficult, how
Mm,
do you, in your home, model
mm,
that contending and standing firm and saying what you need to say, but doing it in a way that is godly and loving? I mean, talk a
mm.
little bit about what that looks like.
That's a great question. They say statistically, and this comes out of different reports, that when a generation, so you take a young adult who grew up in the church, grew up going to youth group, and then they fall away. Oftentimes it can be because of the community, the influences that they got when they were in college or work. But really, they say statistically, the number one reason why students who walk away from the faith when they leave the house is because the inconsistency of what they saw modeled at home.
Yes.
And so again, it comes back to not that we're perfect as parent, we definitely aren't. It has
No.
nothing to do with that. They know our flaws left and right. It's not about being perfect, but what I mean by that is it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to live it. And when our kids grow up watching us as parents, even in our failures, in our mistakes, own it, apologize
Mhm.
for it, walk humbly, watching our own repentance, watching our own humility in those things, it models something to them. That's what has a bigger impact on them sticking to their faith or not. Many of them grow up and they go, you know what, it was a sham. My parents, they played church, they played the Christian thing, but I saw
Mhm.
that had a more of a damaging effect than a secular college. So I think we got to be careful to protect on both fronts.
Yeah.
Whatever front that they're going to be influenced outside the home, but certainly understand what happens inside the home has to be a big part of that.
So, what is the culture war a symptom of?
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What exactly happened there?
Well, Paul says that there are three spiritual war fronts when it comes to spiritual warfare. He talks about the flesh, which we all wrestle with that. Then there's the devil, and then there's the world. And the world and culture, of course, there's lots of beauty in the world. We can point to things in culture that reflect Christ. But what Paul's saying is there's so much of the world that has a different agenda. And we know that Satan is the mastermind behind corruption and sin, of course, too. And so all of those things shape
Yeah.
what we're seeing in culture right now. It is a spiritual battle, though. We wrestle
Mm,
not with flesh and blood. And so I think even in John, he says, test the spirits. And he even says in John that the spirit of the Antichrist is already at work. So we know there's an anti-Jesus spirit behind the scenes that wants nothing more to see than a generation fall away from their faith, not be deeply rooted. So we are living in a spiritual, everything's a spiritual battle. Now, it doesn't mean we have to run and hide and be fearful about that, because greater is he who's in us than he who's in the world. But
right.
we have to understand that discerning and discerning the spirits, teaching our kids discernment, I think, is critical. Giving them discernment skills is valid for what is facing the world today, and preparing them so they can be successful as Jesus followers when they go out to work, go out to college, or so
Mm,
forth.
that's so good. You talk about being dangerous in today's
Mm.
world.
Yeah.
I like that. What does that actually look like, and how are we dangerous?
Well, I'll give you an example. So we are here in Portland. A lot of people see the headlines of Portland, just like they might see it in Minneapolis
Minneapolis.
or St.
Yeah.
Paul or other
I'm
places.
right there in it.
Mhm. And I tell people when I travel, they go, "Oh, you're from Portland. We should pray for you." And I go,
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I said, but let me tell you, there's another headline that doesn't get as much, and that's the headline of God's kingdom. And
exactly.
we are seeing that God move. We're seeing young people's flocking to
Yes.
churches right now. I mean,
Yes.
they're coming, and I think it's because they've been disenchanted with the world's and Satan's overpromising. If you tell someone that you can be your own truth, you can be your own sexuality, you can be your own this and that, and they try it, it doesn't satisfy. And so
Right.
they go, those have been empty promises. So we're seeing some really beautiful return. We're seeing
Mhm.
awakenings. Some might even call those revivals breaking out of people and young people who are coming back to faith. And so I think we have to understand Jesus prayed in John 17, Father, don't take them out of the world, but would you protect them from the evil one and keep them unified? So I like to say that we're called to be dangerous because we
Yes.
should be a threat to the kingdom of darkness. We carry the light, and we can all go find our little, echo chambers and with everybody that agrees with us, and there's a place for that.
Yes.
But how are we going to reach people if we're not in the world? And it takes wisdom to do that,
Mhm.
especially with our kids. We don't want to just throw them out there. And I know a lot of parents put their kids in wrong spaces, thinking they're going to be evangelists, and then the jungle ends up eating them. So you have to use
Yes.
wisdom and discernment with even that. But we're
Mhm.
called to, I love in Ephesus, they were dangerous to the idols in Ephesus. That's
Yes,
what we're
they
called to
were.
be.
I love that. My husband is an evangelist.
Oh,
My husband and I are full-time missionaries actually,
love
and
that.
he's an evangelist, and he goes. We live on the University of Minnesota campus,
Oh, wow.
and he goes out and does a lot of evangelism. He works with an evangelism ministry that does a lot of street. He does a lot of street evangelism, and
Wow.
he goes in, and every time he goes out, he comes back and he goes, "I had great conversation with this table full of like 6 young adult men or young adult, people and teenagers." And oftentimes he'll even come back and say, "And they all prayed to receive the Lord." And he goes, "I even sometimes have to go," like, he goes, like, he'll do like a little, "Are you guys interested in receiving the Lord?" After having this conversation about the real gospel, like how, like you need to repent, you need to turn, there
Yeah.
is a hell to, all the things. And they'll say yes, and he'll be like, "Okay, well, let's just make sure. Now, do you realize what that means?" It's almost like he tries to talk them out of it a little bit. But, they just really, you're right, there's just this hunger for absolute truth. There's a
Uh-huh.
hunger for realness. I think
Yes.
that they've gotten counterfeit, like you talk about so much in your book, for so long that when they see something that's real, it's
Yeah.
like they latch onto it with all they have. Have you found that to be true?
Oh my goodness, it's absolutely true. This generation, my daughter just the other day, again, she's 27, and she said, "Our generation wants the truth. Tell us the
Yeah.
truth. Don't hold back." And so I
Yes.
think we've watered down the gospel. I think we have made Jesus light in terms of trying to
Mhm.
make it relevant to the world. We're not called to be relevant to the world. That is
Yeah,
not what we're called
no.
to be. We're not called to even mimic the world to try to water everything down. I mean, what makes us dangerous and compelling is Jesus. I'm not that compelling, I'm just a guy. And
Yeah,
so none of us aren't that compelling, but boy,
right.
Christ in us, he's compelling.
Yeah.
So if we walk in the footsteps of Jesus and empowered by the Spirit of Jesus in the
Mhm.
world, then we become compelling. Our truth is compelling, which it's his truth. It's not my subjective truth, but the truth we carry is his truth. It is compelling, especially in a world of lies and a world of darkness where the world has said you can be the center of your universe. You can be whatever you want. And that wears people down. And they come to the realization, no, I'm looking for something more. They are looking for the truth. And it's the truth that sets them
Yeah.
free. And I
Yeah.
think too, the other side of the compelling is I'm just a big fan of, again, with wisdom, but we used to take our kids when they were 8 and 9 on the streets of Portland, feeding the homeless. And
Yeah.
we did all of those things and we did it wisely, but we wanted that experience. We wanted our kids to see how we engage the world. And we had great conversations talking home. I think the best conversations are side by side while
Yeah.
you're doing ministry together as a family. That's the best teaching place. And then my daughter, who's 27, she leads our outreaches for our church. She's 27 years old. She leads teams now on the streets of Portland, doing the homeless work, doing discipleship and evangelism. And so she just references that's because what we did growing up. So I know it doesn't always work out, and that's not the goal of every
Right.
kid. I think it's, as a family unit, we have to model that and we have to do these things together. That's true discipleship and show them the world is dark, yes, but we are here to be missionaries in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the missional, aspect of being able to disciple our children and being able to, like, as homeschooling families, we have just so much opportunity. What a
Mm,
blessing to be
yeah,
able to daily pour into our kids and then to be able to challenge them. And even during the school day, when other people are, other kids are busy at school or whatever, we can go into the nursing homes. We can go out on this on
right.
into the areas where there's some homeless maybe, or the food kitchen, or and we can actually volunteer when they are desperate for volunteers
That's
and
right.
give our kids that opportunity to really see what it's like to be countercultural, to
That's right.
not just say, listen, hey, you don't have to live like this, and you don't have to be this way, and God has a plan for your life, and for our kids to walk with us while we do that is just, I mean, I can't imagine a better education, honestly, for them, than to see that,
Yeah. That's 100% it. And, just my son the other day, again, he's, over here at the house and he's 23 and we have some neighbors that have a whole worldview that is way different than ours. Let me just say that. And I mean, the complete opposite in their gender, sexuality, identifying what is marriage, all that. And they,
Sure.
knocked on our door, needed some help. And I went over there with my son and said, we're going to help them because see, here's the thing. Satan wants to, this is a massive lie out there. Satan says
Yeah.
that love is defined by agreeing and affirming.
Mm.
That's one of the cultural lies that we're battling right now. And so what ends up happening is if you believe that affirming and agreeing with everybody that's different than you, that's the true definition of love. But really, you can love someone deeply and not agree
Yeah.
with them. And I
Yes.
think that when we do love the world deeply, and especially those who disagree with us, we're telling them a different story because they've been told that. And then what that does is it opens up now conversations, and we want to have
Uh-huh.
those evangelistic conversations to share Jesus with them. And so we have to model it. We have to bridge that. So you can hold in one hand, love deeply, and also hold your convictions deeply. And I think the combination of that together is a powerful apologetic for a non-believing world.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, it could go on and on forever. You guys, this book is, I'm gonna show it to you right here. This book is a really, really good book. The thing that I like about it is, look at that. It's not very thick. So here, homeschool moms, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a hint here. So we have co-ops in homeschooling world,
Yep.
right? And
Uh-huh.
so a lot of times the moms will have time during when they're not engaging in a class, they have time as parents to come together and do, like, either a book study or something like that. You guys, this would be a really good one. And the reason I think that is because this is just walking you through where we are right now in our world. It is so practical. It is absolutely, you will read it and you will go, oh my gosh, I just had that conversation yesterday. Or that was on the news this morning. Or my child asked me that question 2 days ago. Or at church, I saw this and it was concerning. Or it's going to hit you where you are right now. Your kids are also being, they're being taught things and experiencing things. They're hearing those conversations that you may not think that they're understanding or it's going over their head, but it's not. They're
Mm.
getting it. Because you aren't engaging them, they don't know how to engage you in
Mm.
asking those questions. This is going to help you, I promise. It is a great small group book for if you're in a church that has small groups. Even if you aren't in a church that has small groups, start one. This is a great one for that. Going through it with your teenagers, your high school students, before they get out into the actual world of career, college, whatever it is God is calling them to do. Even guys, if they're going to a Bible college, please don't assume that they're just going to have just Jesus all the time and the real Jesus and real biblical truth, because that's not always the case. And missions work and all of that. My husband and I are full-time missionaries. Many of you, I talk about it a lot. We have encountered things that we were like from other missionaries. We're like, boy, is that even in the Bible? I don't know. You know, so, they have to know, they have to understand, and they're going to be getting bombarded with these things. And the thing that I like about Mike's book is that it's practical and
Yeah.
he doesn't use a whole lot of words when he doesn't need to. And I love that. He just
That's
gets to the point.
Well, what's funny is, I believe in a multi-generational, as a pastor, I would believe in a multi-generational and intergenerational, because I believe
I
that
love
every
that.
generation needs each other.
Mhm.
The older, I tell us in our church, there is no retirement plan. The only retirement plan is heaven. So at
Yeah.
every age, we're called to pour into each other as a family. And the reason I say that is because every sermon I do, I think of every generation, because
Mhm.
my goal, we believe that the students should come into the service with their families at our church.
Yeah.
Because my goal after a message is, could they drive home as a family and have a conversation?
So
So
good.
if there was one thing, and if it was just one thing the junior higher or the high schooler took away from the sermon, and there was one thing mom and dad, so my goal is every sermon is to create a conversation for the drive home. And so I wrote the book kind of with that in mind,
Yeah.
is, how can we create a resource for families, singles, of
Yeah.
course, too, but for families as well.
Yeah. It's just so good. My husband always says that when he retires our car, that means he puts 4 new tires on it so we can keep going. And I'm like,
I love it.
so I see my future now. I know
That's
exactly
right.
what's happening.
That's right.
I get it. I get it. Okay.
That's
Anyway,
so good.
well, Mike, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for writing truth and not being afraid to stand up and say some of the things you say in here could be considered controversial, could be
Mhm.
considered difficult to hear.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that there are people who are like, well, I just don't believe that. That's fine. But if your belief doesn't line up with the word of God, then you need to rethink your belief.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how it is. Like there's a lot of things I don't believe either, but then I have to believe it because it's what God says and I don't want to believe it, but
That's
I
right.
have to, If I'm honest, I don't want to. I'd rather just, affirm everybody and let everybody be happy and keep
Yeah.
the peace and walk in but that's for another time. That's not
Mm.
for now.
That's right.
So, thank you so, so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Dale. It was an honor to be on here. Sure appreciate you and your ministry. God bless you.
Thank you. You too. And for our listeners, thank you guys so much for coming. Again, every Monday and Thursday, new episodes. Come and check it out. Everything that we discussed in this podcast will be in the description in the show notes, so you can find out how to buy the book. Anything else you need to know about Mike, because he's kind of an interesting person if you really look into him a little bit. But yeah, so we're excited. So thank you guys so much for being here. Have a wonderful day. Get out there, find ways to serve, and we'll talk later.